Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty fascinating, something called karma.
Yeah, karma. I mean, it's one of those concepts you hear thrown around a lot.
Right, it's like almost cliche at this point.
But there's actually some really profound depth to it when you really start to unpack it.
Oh, absolutely. And, for this deep dive, we've got a really cool mix of
We
sources.
do. It's like we're tapping into this ancient wisdom of Buddhist philosophy,
Yeah.
and we're kind of weaving in these motivational ideas.
Yeah, and some like inspirational stuff too, right?
Definitely. And also trying to ground it in psychology?
I like that. So we're kind of looking at this from like a really well-rounded perspective.
Exactly. And, I think the real mission here is to understand how this whole karma thing, this idea that like what you put out comes back to you.
Right, like an echo.
Exactly. It's like an echo, or it's like, yeah, I always think of it as like you're walking through a forest, right? And every decision you make is kind of like choosing a different path.
Oh, I like that. Like you're creating your own journey with every step.
Exactly. And so the question we're kind of exploring is, what if the problems you're facing today, like the stuff you're dealing with, are actually like echoes of choices you made a while back?
Whoa, okay. That's getting deep.
Yeah, and I think a good way to visualize it is like imagine this massive computer program running in the background of your life.
Okay.
And all these little decisions, all those little choices you make, like the ones you don't even really think about.
Like the unchecked boxes, you mean?
Exactly. Those unchecked boxes, they get recorded in that program. And over time, they can really start to slow things down.
Like create bottlenecks in the system.
Yeah, and I think that's where the whole idea of karma gets a bit uh, heavy for some people.
Oh, definitely. It can feel like you're stuck with this like predetermined fate, right?
Right. But the thing is, karma isn't about fate at all. It's actually way more dynamic than that.
Okay, so it's not like this fixed thing.
Nope, not at all. You have the power to change your karma, to kind of like rewrite the code.
I would like that. So it's more about understanding the patterns and then being able to shift them.
Exactly. And what's so cool is that this ancient idea of karma actually aligns really well with modern psychology.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you know how psychology talks about self-awareness being so important for growth?
Right?
Well, it's kind of like that. When you become aware of your own karmic patterns, it's like you can start to debug your own internal software.
That's a great analogy. So recognizing those patterns is like the first step.
Exactly. And the sooner you start recognizing and addressing these patterns, the better.
Yeah, I can see that. Like a small tangle is easier to untangle than a huge knot.
Exactly. And the longer you wait, the more those patterns can kind of like solidify.
And then they create bigger problems down the line.
Exactly. And one of the sources actually tells this really interesting story about a guy named Arjun.
Okay, what happened to Arjun?
Well, Arjun, he was really struggling in life, right? He kept blaming everything on bad luck, saying it was everyone else's fault.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
Right. But then he started to learn about karma, and he had this big realization.
What was it?
He realized that a lot of his struggles were actually like stemming from his own inability to forgive himself.
Oh, wow. So, like, his own internal stuff was manifesting in his external reality.
Exactly. But the cool thing is, once he recognized that, once he started to like work on forgiving himself, everything started to shift for him.
That's awesome. So, it's like, it's never too late to start changing your karma.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be exploring in this deep dive, how to kind of like uncover your own strengths.
Yeah, I like that. Like, how to find those hidden gems and clear out some of that karmic clutter.
Exactly. And ultimately, how to create more space for joy and abundance in your life.
Okay, I'm so ready for this. Let's dive in.
All right, so the sources break down karma into three main components, right?
Okay, let's hear them.
We've got thoughts, words, and actions.
Okay, so it's like a trifecta of how we interact with the world.
Exactly. And they're all interconnected,
Yeah.
like a web.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, let's start with thoughts, because in a way, thoughts are like the seeds of karma.
Okay, so like everything begins with a thought.
Pretty much. Your thoughts shape how you see the world.
Right, like if you're constantly thinking negative thoughts, you're going to see everything through a negative lens.
Exactly. And your thoughts also kind of like create the energy you put out into the world.
Oh, like your vibe attracts your tribe kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, from a Buddhist perspective, even a tiny negative thought can have some pretty big consequences.
Okay, so it's not just the big, obvious thoughts that matter.
No, it's all of them. They're all little seeds that have the potential to grow.
So it's kind of like our mind is a garden, And our thoughts are the seeds.
I love that analogy. It's so
Mhm.
true. If you're constantly planting seeds of doubt and fear, you're going to end up with a pretty prickly garden.
Right. Whereas if you focus on planting seeds of gratitude and kindness.
Then you get a beautiful, flourishing garden. And that's really what we want, right?
Totally. And one thing that really resonated with me from the sources is this idea of how negative self-criticism can be so damaging.
Oh, yeah, that constant inner voice that tells you you're not good enough.
Yeah, that one. It can be so insidious.
It really can.
Yeah.
And it creates this negative feedback loop. The more you criticize yourself, the worse you feel, and then the more you criticize yourself.
Right, it's a vicious cycle. But what's the alternative?
Well, the alternative is self-compassion. It's about acknowledging your own worth, even when you make mistakes.
So it's not about ignoring the mistakes, but about changing how we relate to them.
Exactly. It's about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a good friend.
Okay, I can see how that would be a much healthier approach.
It really is. And, from these thoughts come our words, which are the next component of karma.
Yeah, yes. The power of speech.
And it really is powerful. Words can heal, but they can also harm.
That's true. There's that saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Yeah, but I think that's a bit misleading, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Words can leave some pretty deep scars.
They really can. And what's interesting is that our words don't just affect the people we're speaking to.
Oh, right. They also affect us, the speaker.
Exactly. Every time we speak, we're kind of reinforcing certain patterns in our own minds.
So if we're constantly complaining and criticizing, we're strengthening those negative pathways.
Right. And on the flip side, if we're consciously choosing to speak kindly and positively,
Then we're building those positive pathways.
exactly. And, one of the sources talks about this concept of right speech, which is part of the Buddhist Eightfold Path.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. What does it entail?
Well, it's basically about speaking truthfully, kindly, and constructively.
So it's not just about what you say, but also how you say it?
Exactly. It's about being mindful of the impact your words have on both yourself and others.
Okay, I'm definitely going to be paying more attention to my speech from now on.
Me too. And then we get to actions, which are the final piece of the karma puzzle.
Right. Actions speak louder than words, as they say.
And actions are often the hardest part because they require real effort and discipline.
Yeah, it's one thing to think about being kind, and another thing to actually do something kind.
Exactly. And, the sources really emphasize the importance of ethical conduct in purifying your karma.
So it's about acting with integrity, respecting others, and trying to minimize harm.
Exactly. And, they have this great example in the material about two colleagues on their lunch break.
Okay, what are they doing?
Well, one of them is just passively scrolling through social media.
Just zoning out, maybe comparing themselves to everyone else's perfect lives.
Right. And the other colleague is actively mentoring a younger coworker.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And both of them are taking actions, right? But those actions are having very different effects.
Yeah, one is kind of leading to disconnection, and the other is fostering growth and connection.
Exactly. And it's a great reminder that even our seemingly small, everyday actions can have a big impact.
So it's not just the big, dramatic actions that matter.
Nope, it's all of them. They're all contributing to our overall karmic tapestry.
Okay, so we've covered thoughts, words, and actions, the three components of karma.
We have. And now the sources take us to what I think is a really exciting part, how to actually transform karma.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
So they kind of present this idea that you are the alchemist of your own life.
Oh, I like that. So we have the power to change our karma, to turn it into something positive.
Exactly. And they suggest that the Four Noble Truths from Buddhist philosophy offer a really powerful framework for doing just that.
Okay, I'm familiar with the Four Noble Truths, but I've never really thought about them in the context of karma before.
Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective. So the first truth is the truth of suffering, which is often called dukkha.
Right.
And basically what this truth is saying is that suffering arises when we cling to expectations or resist change.
Okay, so it's like when we try to control things that are ultimately out of our control.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And in the context of karma, suffering often comes from those unresolved patterns that we've been talking about.
Okay, so it's like those patterns keep us stuck in cycles of suffering.
Exactly. And one of the examples they give is of someone who keeps getting betrayed in relationships.
Ouch. Yeah, that's tough.
Right. And they finally realize that their fear of betrayal is actually stemming from past hurts.
So, like, they're attracting what they fear because they haven't healed those old wounds.
Exactly. And that recognition, that awareness of the pattern is the first step towards breaking free from it.
Okay, so awareness is key.
Absolutely. And then we have the second truth, the truth of the cause of suffering, also known as samadaya.
And what does this one tell us?
Well, this truth points to attachment, aversion, and ignorance as the root causes of suffering.
Okay, so attachment is like clinging to things that we think will bring us happiness.
Right. Like clinging to material possessions or clinging to certain outcomes.
And aversion is like pushing away things that we think will cause us pain.
Exactly. Like avoiding difficult emotions or avoiding certain people or situations.
And ignorance is like not seeing things clearly, being blinded by our own delusions.
Exactly. And all of these things, attachment, aversion, and ignorance, lead to the creation of negative karma.
Okay, so it's like they're the fuel that keeps the cycle of suffering going.
Exactly. And it's interesting how this aligns with modern psychology, you know?
How so?
Well, there's a lot of research showing that suppressing emotions actually makes them stronger.
Oh, right, like what you resist persists.
Exactly. So in order to break free from those karmic patterns, we need to confront our fears and our difficult emotions head on.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then we get to the third truth, the truth of the end of suffering, or nirodha.
And this is where things start to get hopeful. Yeah.
Exactly. This truth tells us that liberation from suffering is possible.
So it's not just about acknowledging the suffering, but about knowing that there's a way out.
Exactly. And the way out is through letting go of attachments and purifying our intentions.
So it's not about avoiding all challenges in life.
Right. It's about facing them with more clarity and equanimity.
And what about the fourth truth?
Ah, yes. The fourth truth is the truth of the path to the end of suffering, or magga. And this is where we get the Eightfold Path.
Right, the Eightfold Path. That can feel a little overwhelming sometimes, you know?
I know what you mean. It's a lot to take in all at once. But the good news is you don't have to do it all at once.
Oh, good. So where do we start?
Well, the sources suggest starting small. Pick one aspect of the Eightfold Path and focus on that.
Okay, that feels more manageable.
Right. And maybe a good place to start is with right speech.
Right speech. Okay, remind me what that is again.
It's basically about speaking truthfully, kindly, and constructively.
So it's about being mindful of the impact our words have on ourselves and others.
Exactly. And even small changes in how we speak can have a big ripple effect.
Okay, I like that. Small changes, big impact.
And now, the sources shift gears a bit and start talking about the power of compassion.
Oh, compassion. That's a big one.
It really is. And they emphasize that compassion is a powerful antidote to negativity and a key ingredient in transforming karma.
And that makes sense, right? When we're compassionate, we're not creating more suffering.
Exactly. And compassion is about more than just feeling sorry for someone.
Right. It's about taking action to alleviate suffering.
Exactly. And the sources highlight two types of compassion that are particularly important: compassion for others and compassion for ourselves.
Okay, so it's not just about being kind to others, but also about being kind to ourselves.
Exactly. And they tell this really inspiring story about a woman named Maya who worked in a very high-stress corporate environment.
Okay, what does she do?
Well, she consciously decided to start responding to difficult situations with empathy instead of defensiveness.
So, like, she chose to meet negativity with compassion.
Exactly. And it had this amazing ripple effect. The whole atmosphere around her started to shift.
Wow, that's powerful.
It really is. And then there's the whole self-compassion piece.
Yeah, that can be a tough one for a lot of people, myself included.
I know what you mean. It's easy to beat ourselves up for past mistakes.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that.
But holding on to that guilt and shame just perpetuates the cycle of negative karma.
So, how do we break free from that?
Well, the sources suggest practicing self-forgiveness.
Okay, so it's about letting go of that judgment and extending ourselves the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a friend.
Exactly. And they suggest a really cool exercise: writing a letter to your younger self.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's about acknowledging those past struggles and offering words of encouragement and understanding.
It's like giving yourself a little pep talk from your wiser, more compassionate self.
Exactly. And that can be really powerful in shifting those old patterns.
Okay, so we've talked about compassion, but what about forgiveness?
Ah, yes. Forgiveness. That's another biggie. And the sources really emphasize that forgiveness is essential for clearing karma.
And that makes sense, right? Holding on to anger and resentment just creates more suffering.
Exactly. And they make this really important distinction. Forgiveness isn't about condoning harmful behavior.
Oh, right. It's not about saying that what happened was okay.
Exactly. It's about releasing the emotional burden that's weighing you down.
They have this great analogy. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
I love that analogy. It's so true. We're the ones who suffer when we hold on to anger and resentment.
So how do we actually practice forgiveness?
Well, it's a process, and it can be challenging. But one of the sources tells this really inspiring story about a guy named Ravi, who was betrayed by his business partner.
Oh, wow, that's rough.
It was. And he held on to that anger and bitterness for a long time. But eventually, he decided to let it go.
And what happened?
He experienced this incredible sense of relief. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders.
That's amazing. So even in the face of serious betrayal, forgiveness is possible.
It is. And it's not just about forgiving others, it's also about forgiving ourselves.
Right, because sometimes we're the ones who need forgiveness the most.
And, the sources suggest that even if we can't directly communicate with the person we need to forgive, we can still write them a letter.
Oh, that's a good idea. It's like getting those feelings out of our system.
Exactly. And it can be a really powerful step in the healing process.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Compassion, forgiveness, the Four Noble Truths.
We have, and now the sources introduced this really powerful practice, mindfulness meditation.
Oh, mindfulness. That's something I've been meaning to try.
You should. It's incredibly beneficial. And in the context of karma, it's a really helpful tool for observing our patterns without judgment.
So it's about creating space between us and our thoughts and emotions.
Exactly. It's about becoming the observer rather than getting swept away by the current.
And the sources outline some pretty simple steps for practicing mindfulness.
Yeah, it's really accessible. You just find a quiet place, sit comfortably, and focus on your breath.
Okay, that sounds doable.
Right. And then you just observe your thoughts and feelings as they come and go without getting attached to them.
So it's like watching clouds drift by in the sky.
I love that analogy. It's perfect. And the more you practice mindfulness, the better you get at responding to situations rather than reacting.
So it's about creating that pause between stimulus and response.
Exactly. And that pause gives us the opportunity to make choices that are more aligned with our values.
So it's a way to consciously shape our karma.
Exactly. And now the sources expand our view a bit and start talking about collective karma.
Collective karma. Okay, so it's not just about individual actions.
Right. Our individual actions contribute to a larger energetic field.
So like we're all interconnected.
Exactly. And the sources suggest that communities that prioritize compassion and cooperation tend to thrive.
Whereas communities that are filled with negativity and division struggle.
Exactly. And, it makes you think about those moments when you witness an act of kindness.
Oh yeah, those can be so heartwarming.
They really can. And they often inspire us to pay it forward, to do something kind for someone else.
Right, it's like that positive energy is contagious.
It really is. And, the sources suggest that service is a really powerful way to purify karma.
Service, like volunteering and helping others.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from me to we.
Okay, I like that. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing our interconnectedness.
Yeah, exactly. And they have this great challenge. Try doing one random act of kindness every day for the next 21 days.
Ooh, I'm gonna try that.
Me too. Doesn't have to be anything big, just something small to brighten someone's day.
I love that. Small acts, big impact.
And it's so encouraging to see how this ancient wisdom of karma is aligning with modern psychology.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, there's a lot of research showing that cultivating virtues like gratitude, empathy, and resilience has a huge impact on our well-being.
That makes sense. When we focus on the good, we feel better.
Exactly. And empathy helps to connect with others and feel less alone.
And resilience helps us to bounce back from challenges.
Exactly. And all of these qualities contribute to positive karma.
So it's like we're not just helping ourselves when we cultivate these virtues, we're also helping to create a better world.
Exactly. And now we come to the final section of our sources, where they reframe karma as a source of empowerment.
Oh, I like that. So it's not just about punishment and reward, but about growth and transformation.
Exactly. They emphasize that karma is a neutral law of cause and effect.
So it's not about some cosmic judge deciding our fate.
Nope, it's simply about the consequences of our actions.
And they use this really cool metaphor of karma as a river.
Oh yeah, I like that one.
If we just let ourselves drift along, we'll end up wherever the current takes us.
But if we use intentionality as our oars, we can steer our own course.
I love that. So intentionality is key.
It really is. And they talk about this concept of satana, which is the Pali word for intention.
Okay, so satana is like the driving force behind our actions.
Exactly. And they suggest asking ourselves, what is my true intention here before we make a decision?
So it's about being mindful of our motivations.
Exactly. And if our intentions are rooted in love, compassion, and wisdom, then our actions will naturally create positive karma.
But if our intentions are based in fear, greed, or ego, then our actions will create negative karma.
Exactly. And one of the key principles they highlight is the importance of aligning our actions with our values.
So it's about walking the talk, so to speak.
Exactly. And they have this great example of someone who decides to cultivate kindness.
Okay, so they set the intention to be kind.
Right. And then they start actively looking for opportunities to express that kindness.
So it's not just a passive wish, it's an active pursuit.
Exactly. And that creates this positive feedback loop. The more kindness you express, the more kindness you attract. And the more positive karma you create.
Exactly. And now, the sources introduce a really interesting paradox. The paradox of letting go.
The paradox of letting go. Okay, I'm intrigued.
So basically, they're saying that in order to gain control of our destiny, we need to let go of our need to control outcomes.
Whoa, okay. That's a little mind-bending.
I know, right? But it makes sense when you think about it.
How so?
Well, when we're attached to specific outcomes, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment.
Right, because we can't always control what happens.
Exactly. And that attachment creates suffering.
So what's the alternative?
Well, the alternative is to focus on the process, to trust that if we're doing the right things, the right outcomes will eventually follow.
So it's about letting go of the how and trusting in the why.
Exactly. And they tell this really cool story about an entrepreneur named Priya who was obsessed with making a profit.
Okay, so she was very focused on the outcome.
Yeah, she was. But she wasn't really enjoying the process, and her business wasn't thriving.
So what changed? She decided to shift her focus to serving her customers authentically.
So she let go of that attachment to profit and focused on creating value.
Exactly. And paradoxically, that's when her business really took off.
Wow, that's amazing.
It really is. And another key aspect of letting go is embracing the reality of impermanence.
Impermanence meaning that everything changes.
Exactly. Nothing lasts forever. And while that can be a bit scary, it can also be incredibly liberating.
How so?
Well, when we understand that nothing is permanent, we can appreciate the present moment more fully.
Right, because we know that it won't last forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in the context of karma, it's a reminder that even our negative patterns aren't permanent.
So it's never too late to change.
Exactly. And they have this nice suggestion. At the end of each day, take a moment to reflect on the fleeting nature of life.
So it's like a practice in gratitude for the present moment.
Exactly. And now we come to the final piece of the puzzle, the ripple effect.
The ripple effect, meaning that our actions have consequences beyond ourselves.
Exactly. Our individual karma contributes to the collective karma of the world.
So like we're all in this together.
Exactly. And the sources emphasize that our individual actions can have a profound impact on the whole.
They give the example of a single drop of water creating ripples that spread across a pond.
I love that analogy. It's so simple, but so powerful.
And they also highlight the inspiring examples of people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Mother Teresa.
Individuals whose actions created massive positive change in the world.
So it's like we all have the potential to be change makers.
We do. And they leave us with this final challenge. For the rest of this 21-day period, commit to doing one invisible act of kindness every day.
Invisible, meaning that we don't do it for recognition or praise.
Exactly. We do it just because it's the right thing to do.
I love that. It's about making the world a better place, one small act at a time.
Exactly. So, to sum up, we've explored the nature of karma, its components, the Four Noble Truths, the power of compassion and forgiveness, mindfulness, intentionality, the importance of letting go, and the ripple effect.
That's a lot to digest.
It is. But the key takeaway is that karma is not a limitation, it's an opportunity.
Right. It's a way to understand how our choices create our reality.
Exactly. And by making conscious choices, we can shape our karma and create a more positive and fulfilling life.
So what's our next step?
Well, the sources suggest starting with awareness. Become aware of your thoughts, your words, and your actions.
Okay, awareness is key.
Then cultivate clear and compassionate intentions.
So ask yourself, why am I doing this? What is my motivation?
Exactly. And then take consistent and ethical actions that are aligned with those intentions.
Okay, so it's about walking the talk.
Exactly. And finally, Trust the process.
Trust that if you're doing the right things, the right outcomes will eventually follow.
Exactly. And along the way, remember to practice gratitude and compassion.
Gratitude for all the good in your life and compassion for yourself and others.
Exactly. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Wow, that was amazing. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of karma.
Me too. It's such a rich and complex topic,
Right.
but ultimately it's about empowerment.
Right. It's about understanding that we have the power to create our own reality.
Exactly. And we hope this deep dive has inspired you to explore these principles further and to start consciously shaping your own karma.
It's a journey, and we're all in it together.
And until our next deep dive, keep making those positive ripples.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
It was a pleasure.